So for the purpose of today's discussion, I guess it's really important to discuss who are consumers in research. And the term, consumer isn't always necessarily used with people with lived experience of spinal cord injury. When we think consumer, we think somebody more of a marketing term that we think, well, who's actually buying something that we use, or who's our target audience. And it's not too dissimilar. So when we think about the target audience of research, we are thinking of people with lived experience as the end user or the end beneficiary, but there are different beneficiaries along the way. And that's how I really like to simplify it, that consumers in this space are the beneficiaries. So obviously, the primary beneficiary should always be the person living with a spinal cord injury, as they have to deal with the everyday issues, obviously the paralysis, the secondary complications that we've spoken before, the transition back to life and engaging in the community. Also family members, so that they're sometimes a bit forgotten in this whole process as well, that family members need to research around how family members can best deal with having a loved one with a spinal cord injury, and the ability for research to impact their experience and their transition to having somebody with a spinal cord injury in their life as well. Therapists and clinicians, so they benefit through being able to expand their practice and be kept up to date by what's the best way that they should be implementing their services for people with spinal cord injuries, whether they're community-based, whether they're hospital-based. So research really benefits them by being able to provide the best level of care or the best level of service for people with spinal cord injuries. And once again, that then benefits people with spinal cord injuries. The more engaged that you have a therapist or a clinician in their understanding of dealing with spinal cord injuries, patients with spinal cord injuries, that directly benefits people with SCI and family members. And think about it, if you're in the audience and you have a spinal cord injury, how frustrating can it be when you go to see a therapist or see somebody and they're not really kept up to date with having a spinal cord injury? And it's, having an SCI myself, I do find that frustrating at times. So it really is, research really is a way of therapists and clinicians to keep up to date with the best way to deal with people living with an SCI. And also community-based organisations, so large peer-based organisations or organisations that provide services with people living with SCI. Having research benefits them by being able to provide the best level of service and the best level of care for people with spinal cord injuries. There are other beneficiaries and sort of flow-offs on that, but they're probably the main ones that we want to focus on today. So how do these consumers benefit? So obviously research, and there's a medical aspect to research. So there's a medical interventions in research, things like medication, things like care practices, things like prevention as well, which is a really big issue in society. So research benefits people that way. But then if you think about it, well, who's actually benefiting that? So once again, the end user, the person with a spinal cord injury, benefits from having better medical research conducted, but also the people working in those areas, so doctors, nurses, surgeons, benefit from research as well by being able to provide better levels of care in those acute and subacute areas. Rehabilitation as well benefits, and consumers benefit, once again, same sort of principle, through better practice within rehabilitation centres, as well as rehabilitation specialists being more engaged and understanding what works in the areas of rehabilitation. And one of the main drivers of this was Ludwig Gutmann, who really drove this when in Stoke Mandeville, when they really changed the way that spinal cord injuries was approached, and it's more of a rehab focus and the quality of rehab focus as well. So that's an impact that sort of lives today as well, and that benefits people with spinal cord injuries. Community-based therapists and therapy practices really benefit as well. So, and once again, so the consumers benefit from having better rehab, but therapists benefit as well. So people engaging with people in the community really benefit from having best practice, and an understanding of what works and what doesn't work when providing therapy to people with lived experience. Another side is the policy side. So, an example I use in Australia is that one of the biggest policy changes in Australia for disability policy was things like the NDIS, where basically research into how the quality of life of people with disabilities can be enhanced was then made into policy. So there was an advocacy component of that. So people with disabilities saying that we need change, a research component of that, where the government retrieved data on how to make change and how to best make change, and then obviously that leading to a policy change. And also policy around things like access. So where I live in Victoria, the state, there are access requirements. For example, if a new ramp is to be built, it can only be a certain um, steepness or gradient. So that's a policy change that the government has implemented in, and there is a research component behind that. There is information that's behind those changes, and also society changes as well. So research can really change the way that people think about people with disabilities. So the more information that is provided to the community that is research backed really changes the perceptions of how people approach people with disabilities.